Hi, my name is Andrea Sledd, licensed clinical social worker here at the Massey Cancer Center. Many of you may have met your social worker or me here at Massey, and today I'm here to talk to you about disenfranchised grief and living with cancer. We can move on to the slide. Disenfranchised grief is something that many folks have not heard of before. I think a lot about cancer, living with cancer, and loss. And I really think it's important to understand that there's a lot of myths that come with loss and grief. Next slide. I think the most important myth is that grief only applies to death. Grief is a common response to loss. We associate grief with death of a loved one, but really we experience it due to the loss of anything that holds meaning to us. When we have a diagnosis of cancer, the primary loss is our health. But there's so many secondary losses that are related that just radiate throughout parts of our lives, including, but not limited to, loss of feeling in control of our lives, changes in work. Lots of my folks have to take extended time off or lose chance at a promotion that was important to them, lose their job entirely, or have to retire early. And this brings with it loss of financial security. There's lots of relationship changes that come when we have cancer. Role reversal with a partner who's now a caregiver, feeling isolated from loved ones, losing touch with friends, altered sexual relationships with our significant other. Sometimes we experience a loss of fertility due to our cancer. The body changes that come with it. Maybe we've lost our hair during chemo treatment, or we've had a mastectomy. Sometimes there's body changes related to hormone therapy or other kinds of sexual side effects. Functional changes, so our functional status, losing a part of a body, the neuropathy that can affect our ability to walk or use of our hands. We might have to use medical equipment now to be mobile. There's lots of cognitive changes that can come with chemotherapy, whole brain radiation, or just having brain mets. And just generally the loss of independence. We can experience a spiritual crisis or loss of self-worth or identity. When I think about cancer and loss, the losses change over time during our cancer experience, over the course of treatment, and even when we're in remission, because sometimes things don't pop up until many months or sometimes even years later. Next slide. One of the things I think is so important to think about is cancer and just the grief experience. Again, coming back to the ideas about myth and the myths of grief. One of those myths being that it's, just specific to death. I think that there's also very much still a myth that there is a linear progression to grief, and that it's something that we have to get over, that we have to get back to normal. There's something that Megan Devine, author of It's Okay, You're Not Okay, something that she said that I loved, which is that no matter whether you're a friend, family, provider, that there's just this idea that grief is a problem and that I need to be cheered up as soon as possible. We're trying to pull this messy, untidy emotion behind us and get back to life. But when we have cancer or have had cancer, our life is different. Sometimes people don't want to go there because there's this idea of manifesting, right? If I say it, I speak it into existence. And so when I talk about the losses I'm experiencing, I'm providing them with attention, or I might manifest them in my life in a different way. Sometimes family or friends, they're just trying to be encouraging and loving and strengthening to provide hope for us. But this can also lead us to feel like that person is silver lining us. If anybody's a fan of Brene Brown, meaning that they're trying to get us to focus on the good. Sometimes somebody might say, at least you're alive, or, at least you got stage 1 cancer. And so they might minimize our experience with very good intentions. Another piece of the grief experience for folks is that sometimes our friends or our family members just don't really have the emotional bandwidth. And I tell my patients all the time, just because someone loves us doesn't mean that they can go there with us. they might have a difficult time with our negative emotions, the symptoms that we're experiencing. Cancer is an intrapersonal experience, my experience of my cancer, but it's also an interpersonal experience, and how my loved ones, the community around me, is experiencing this as well. So somebody might love me and have every well intention, but just might not be able to go there with me. Next slide. So this experience of maybe not really having our cancer losses validated can lead to what we call disenfranchised grief. It's a term coined originally by Dr. Ken Doka. He described disenfranchised grief as what persons experience when they incur a loss that's not or cannot be openly acknowledged, socially sanctioned, or publicly mourned. So what does that mean for us as a person experiencing cancer? It means that maybe my grief's not acknowledged, but not recognized. I'm not being recognized as somebody who is grieving, or the grieving is stigmatized, right? Getting back to that idea of that silver lining. So if I'm trying to talk about how I'm feeling, but somebody is saying, at least you're still alive, or at least, you lost this, but you still have this. It's kind of putting that experience a bit in a box and not letting me go there. So I can't really have that outward expression of grief. Next slide. So what can grief feel like? Grief can feel like avoiding the places or things that remind me of the loss. Trouble sleeping, substance misuse, anxiety, depression, unexplained physical symptoms like stomach issues or unexplained pain, muscle tension, diminished self-esteem, shame, feeling overwhelmed, or having mood swings. Next slide. Coping. I talk with my patients all the time about having a toolbox. It might seem silly, but the reason I talk about coping as a toolbox is because just like if I had a project and I'm not going to use the same tool for every part of that project, right? Not that grief is a project, but that there are different situations that bring up different kinds of feelings, and sometimes one tool is going to help and sometimes another is. So I always encourage people to have as many tools in their toolbox as possible. And I think the most important one first is just acknowledging and validating your own experience. So just recognizing that you are experiencing a loss or multiple losses due to what's happening to you. Tell yourself as many times as you need to that it's entirely normal to have enduring thoughts and feelings about your cancer, even if you're in survivorship at this time. Loss is loss. Your grief related to cancer is real and valid, and you have a right to take the time and space that you need to grieve. There's not a right way to deal with it. So just giving yourself that grace and space is so critical. Additionally, finding some sort of way to process your feelings. Sometimes journaling can be helpful for people. I also think a lot about grieving as there's a lot of nonverbals that come with grieving. So some people find other forms of expression to be really helpful, different kinds of art mediums like painting, drawing, photography, collaging, things that kind of have to take the words out of it can be really helpful. Sometimes people do want to talk. If we're an external processor, just really want to talk through something. If we have a friend, family, spiritual community member that we feel really heard by. And sometimes that might be also speaking with the therapist, because it's just really important to remember that you're not alone. And if there's not somebody in your immediate community that is providing that support to you, there's so many ways to engage in community online. I think that, speaking of silver linings, I think one of the positive things to come out of COVID is the extensive online community opportunities for support. Some people find some of the online support groups to be really helpful. There's also in-person groups. There's different listservs and different sorts of social media groups that people can find other people who've had similar experiences as them. It can also be helpful to talk to a professional, getting back to that therapist piece. If sometimes folks ask, when would I speak with a therapist? I think it's important, if you want to talk to a therapist, that's when you should. But if you're having symptoms like intrusive thoughts, avoiding things that are associated with your loss, feeling on edge, that difficulties, the significant difficulty of sleeping, feeling very angry, and just really overwhelmed, those are good times to really take a look at, is what I'm doing for my coping, and it feels like enough for me to be okay, or would professional help be good at this time? Next slide. So I wanted to make sure that coming away from this talk, that folks didn't think that I was just focusing on the negative. Grief and gratitude. Can we hold both? Does acknowledging the feelings related to loss mean that we're not grateful to be alive, to be in treatment? And I would say no. What I tell my patients all the time is, acknowledging the difficulty doesn't mean that you're not strong. Acknowledging the difficulty doesn't mean that you're not coping well. It's just validating your experience. So we can hold multiple truths at the same time, right? There's that great Walt Whitman poem that talks about, do I contradict myself? Well, then I contradict myself, right? I contain multitudes. So cancer can bring loss. Cancer can bring fear. But at the same time, I can be resilient and I can be a survivor. And the loss can bring change that can possibly be an opportunity for new meaning in my life. So the hardship and the resiliency can both be there. The suffering and the gratitude can both be there. Sometimes I might be having one experience more than the other, and that's okay. That's just where I am that day. Next slide. There's lots of resources at Massey in order to support patients, again, on this other side of treatment. There are support groups here. We have an amazing social worker named Frida, who runs our mindfulness practice group. She also runs a women's group for all kinds of cancers. Our chaplain runs a men's cancer support group, and we're going to have a caregiver support group starting this summer. We have an incredible integrative health calendar that has monthly activities related to yoga, rambles, which is a walk that is an opportunity for people to come together as a community. We also have, like me, our oncology social workers here at Massey. We provide formal or informal counseling or connection to outside therapists. We can also provide additional information about community resources if that's what you need as well. If you're looking to connect with the social worker at Massey, the best way to be in touch with your social worker is to reach out to your treatment team. You ask your nurse, you ask your doctor, they're going to make sure that you get connected to us. And the same thing with our wonderful chaplain, Charles. If you'd like to speak with the chaplain, you can ask the providers at any time and they'll make a referral. Next slide. I wanted to end the slide with a poem from author Dr. Galgut, who herself is a survivor. I've posted the link at the bottom to CancerNet where this poem is located. She said, "Please don't tell me how I should feel or what I should think about having breast cancer. how I should be over it by now, how I should be more positive, how I should be grateful that I'm alive. And please don't say you're overreacting to your situation. It's only you who feels like this, or it's time you got on with your life. How can you know? You've never been in my situation. And please don't ask me what I have contributed to my cancer or tell me how brave I've been. There was no choice at all. It was just the luck of the draw. Please don't ask me how my breast cancer journey has been. There was no journey. There is no journey because there was no end in sight. And for pity's sake, don't say, well, we're all going to die one day. I could get run over by a bus tomorrow. It's different. You've never stared death head on. You've never had breast cancer. We are on different sides of the track now. So tell me instead that you cannot know what it's like living in this hell. Tell me instead that you have an open heart and an open mind, that you'll listen, that you'll try and understand. Even when what I'm saying sounds preposterous to you, it's my reality. And please, please try to look beyond your own fears, or if you can't, tell me so. Having breast cancer is terrifying, and the terror does not diminish because the fear that it'll come back is ever present. So please, please don't tell me that I'm one of the lucky ones, that I'll be back to normal soon, because my life and I have changed forever. Our last slide here is the integrative health QR code. Massey has an incredible integrative health program that works to bring all kinds of resources to our patients here. You can scan the QR code. You can call the phone number here or email our integrative health team. You can also find our integrative health space on the ground floor here at Massey downtown. Thank you so much for this time and opportunity to bring the topic with you. And please make sure to reach out to your treatment team if you're ever looking to speak with one of the oncology social workers.